watch over all this stuff.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Father, we thank you so much that we can join together right now through this technology. And that would be my first prayer, Lord, that you would just bless the technology and let everything work well today. I pray you'll give Hannah peace. And thank you just for the work you've been doing through her and the good work they've been doing there in their organization. Just pray, Lord, that you'll give us direction and wisdom. Let your Spirit speak to us today as we are listening and just wanting to know more of what you want us to know. So, Lord, Father, we're praying to you, praying in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, let's get on with it. Why don't we just maybe introduce ourselves? Grace, why don't you start with yourself?
Hello. I'm Grace Barnes. I've known Hannah forever, and back in APU days, and then BGU days, and Reasons to Believe, and all of that. And so she's a special person in my life. And I'm here up in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I guess semi-retired, but I'm doing a lot of things in that. I have a lot of projects and stuff going on, and then this interruption came in my life when I fell. But we live in a wonderful place, and I'm glad that God is still using me. I turn 80 this year.
Wow.
And so hopefully there's still much more that I have to do for God's kingdom.
For sure. All right. Thanks, Grace. Let's see, Rhonda, why don't you introduce yourself and tell me where you're at?
Yeah. So I'm Rhonda McEwen. I've known Hannah, I guess, for maybe three years or so now.
Okay.
And I think I met her actually at another doctoral dissertation defense. And as we chatted, recognized that we had a lot in common, even though we had just met.
All right.
Experiences and so on. But yeah, I'm currently up in Washington, in Bellingham, Washington.
Okay.
But I'm teaching and working part-time up at Regent College.
Okay.
In Vancouver, and then also do some consulting and other teaching. But I did live in Southern California for a number of years and was at Biola teaching in their doctoral programs.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, we've had some similar roots. Yeah. I
Do you know Paul Stevens?
Yeah. Well, he's retired, of course, now, but
yeah, he still teaches on our faculty.
Oh,
Paul
great.
does. Yeah. Good. All right. Liz, where are you at? And how do you happen to know Hannah?
California, at my desk at Azusa Pacific.
Okay.
I couldn't get away, even though Hannah's not that far away, so I did send my husband in my place. I have known Hannah since we worked together at English Language Institute China a lot.
Okay.
And then we did our master's degree together, and then have done a lot of life together since then. So I'm happy to have played a very small part in her personal learning community, and I'm really proud to be here today.
All right. Great. Who do you have in the room there with you, Hannah?
I have more of my personal learning community. I have my husband, Micah, who lives here in San Dimas, and also Gwen Lowe, who is a good friend as well, who we met at L'Abri over in Switzerland, and great friend since. Excuse me. And I also have Jeremiah Van Skyke, Liz's husband here. And I have two directors from Reasons to Believe. I have Craig Klutzing, who is our Director of Operations, and Phil Chen, who is our Director of Marketing. And both of these gentlemen have worked with me on this project through different parts, have given feedback, and have played a very significant role in the leadership of the organization.
All right. That's great. You guys are in San Dimas.
Yeah.
Is that towards San Bernardino? Is that somewhere in?
It's not. It's maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. that half
Pomona
hour.
would probably be the more northern city.
Is there a lake out that direction called Lake Casitas or something like that? Is
I've heard of that.
It's not. I used to live in Southern California. I grew up in Linwood, California, that direction. So we used to go to a lake out that direction. I was trying to remember what it is.
Mhm.
We lived in San Dimas. It's right next door to Azusa, really. It's,
Azusa, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. I went to school at Claremont.
Oh,
School of
yeah.
Theology.
yeah.
Yeah. So I
It's
know
next
the area.
door to that, too.
Yeah, I know the area well. All right. I'm Bill Payne, by the way. I'm here at BGU. I'm now called what is my title? I guess Director of Doctoral Projects, right? And kind of helped found the school back in 1990. So been with this BGU for a number of years. Seen a lot of work, and just been a real privilege to be working here.
Yeah, you and your wife both, yeah.
Yeah, my wife Roxy still works kind of as a technical reader, does a lot of the reading of the dissertations and editing, etc. Yeah. So.
Where do you live now? You live in?
Now we live in Idaho. We live about 45 miles south of Coeur d'Alene, right, in a little town called Tensed. Yeah, which is kind of a very rural area. Yeah, right. So we moved out of the Seattle area about 12 years ago.
So do you see Amy at all?
Amy, no, I don't think so.
No.
I don't know if I know Amy. Where does Amy live?
Doesn't she live?
Amy Hoppick is on my personal learning community, and she's in the Boise area.
Oh, Boise. Okay, yeah, she's quite a ways south of us. Yeah, that's
okay.
Another state in terms of Idaho. But yeah. All right, good. Just kind of get to know to kind of hear everybody's background a little bit. So what we're going to be doing, we'll spend 20 minutes or so for Hannah to take us through a PowerPoint presentation, kind of refresh our minds of some of the salient points of the dissertation. After that process, then we'll move into a discussion time. While Hannah's giving the presentation, if you could just maybe think of questions, topics that we could discuss, that would be very helpful. Once we've completed those two components of the oral review, we'll move into an evaluation session. And for that session, I can only have myself and the other two voting members, which would be Rhonda and Grace. I'll need to pull the rest of you out of the session for about 15 minutes. Then after we've finished that and we've issued an evaluation mark, then we will bring everybody back into the session and we will announce the results of this whole process. Okay? All right, with that, Hannah, I'm going to go ahead and give you the microphone and go ahead, go for it.
Thank you. Today I'll be going over the highlights from my study and research here at Reasons to Believe, which is a nonprofit organization that I've been working with for almost 15 years here. And the project is called Reasons to Believe, an integrative and organizational transformational model for innovative sustainability through appreciative inquiry, which is a large mouthful. But basically, what we're looking at is a process of incredible change going on within the organization. And I would argue that it is probably one of the most significant changes in the organization's history. Yes, it's like looking ahead. What's just a moment ago?
Switch it. I think we're in Zoom right now. We're going to switch to
just one moment. It was working just a moment.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. So, and this change that Reasons to Believe is going through, the problem that I foresaw was just the lack of an organizational model for transition of the founders. And I think any organization, nonprofit organization, going through this kind of change, it's a tremendous change, not only for the staff, but the people served, and also for the donors. And as you can see in my first point here, it says the success rate for small organizations is no more than 3 out of 10 make it past the first generation of leadership. And as I've been reviewing that was a concern to me, because we believe that we don't want Reasons to end post the founders moving on. from their current positions. And with Reasons to Believe, it's not just one founder or one CEO. It is two of the three key executive positions here at Reasons to Believe. Our president and founder, Hugh Ross, and his wife, Kathy Ross, are two of the three executive positions at RTV. And a lot of what they're finding too, the reason that more don't make it out of that transition is because of significant loss of a key leadership position. And so with that, that Hugh and Kathy both want the organization to go on. It was never made to be about them. And so currently, Reasons to Believe has about 40 employees. And there is a strain on the operational budget to cover a good succession plan along with new initiatives and outreach that are already planned for the organization. So they don't want to be put in a place where they have to choose either succession planning or innovation. We need to be able to put both in tension so that both can be completed. And with that, putting funding towards innovation and how can we do that in a way that is cost effective for the organization that can sustain it. One of the things that Nancy Sloan and Steve Kramer of Gap International talked about at a conference I went to on fundraising, talk about how finances appear when short-term and long-term goals of the organization sync. And that makes a lot of sense, but I think it's tougher to put into action. And I think a lot of organizations have a great vision, but don't necessarily have the steps to get to that vision or can communicate that well, or they have great short-term goals or projects. And so what I wanted to take a look at is how can we both deal with that short-term and long-term goals to help the organization through this significant change. So right now, RTV has what I would call compelling and influential leaders who share in the science and faith dialogue. And these are Reasons to Believe scholars who do speaking on behalf of the organization. It started with just a team of one with Hugh Ross and expanded into, we have 5 and are shortly adding another one. And many people have come to faith through the resources and events that Reasons to Believe does. And so it is an evangelistic organization, and so we want that to continue for more people to come to Christ through this unique endeavor. And it's a safe place for Christians and agnostics alike. And so we believe it's very unique in that way. And so we want to continue in that vein. Let's see here. So Hugh and Kathy Ross, I think any nonprofit organization would say that, you know, their founders are very unique people and you're not looking to replace those people. But what we're looking for are attributes and behaviors that make people compelling. And I think Hugh and Kathy, both individually and collectively, have a great case for why they have been able to be as successful as they have in this organization that has been around for over 30 years. And those reasons are because they have a strength in their expertise and what they know. They are at, I would say, the top of the list of the science-based conversation and intelligence, but they also have, which also integrates humility and compassion and care for the people that they are dealing with. And so the combination of those two things together allow them to be extremely effective in ministry. And so I think as we look towards the next generation of leadership, it's finding people or people who collectively can work together to provide that both strength and warmth that allows them to have the admiration or influence that they do on their audience. And so I think the research behind that is pretty compelling. And I think as somebody who's been able to work alongside of them for so long, to be able to see that firsthand has been very, very significant. Let's see here. The mission of Reasons to Believe is not complete. So with some organizations, it is possible that after the first generation of leadership, completed mission and vision, and Reasons to Believe doesn't believe that we're not there yet. So how do we keep this type of ministry going? Some of the challenges that the organization has faced, that many nonprofits face as they go through this are, first of all, fear. I think people are very, just have a negative reaction to change, even small change. So something on this level can bring turmoil to an organization, and both internal and external, the staff, as well as donors and resource users, are they going to be able to trust who comes into that position next? Funding is the next thing, and at Reasons to Believe, my position here has been an advancement, and so we're always looking to see where is that funding going to come from to continue the organization, and how are we meeting the needs so that the funding makes sense. And currently, the need is greater than the income, and I think that's probably true in most nonprofit organizations. And then the last one here is a lack of organizational-wide communication of a development plan. I think there's definitely pieces of a good plan, but I think having the language and communication, excuse me, to not only the staff, but all the stakeholders involved, including partners, consultants, donors, and churches, everyone who the organization serves. One of the things that is Santora and Saros talked about in their research on succession planning, specifically in the nonprofit community, is that the selection outcome when you go through this kind of change, specifically with the CEO, is very important to take a look at for what people can trust. So addressing that fear, being able to find people within the organization. If that next CEO is somebody within the organization, there's a little bit of comfort there that provides stability of we know what to expect. The downside of that is bringing somebody in from the outside provides maybe new insight and fresh ideas that could take the organization to the next level. And so all of these signal to the staff as well as the community of what they can expect from the organization. Another significant part of what we're looking at for a successful succession plan is the Vision 2020. And so I talk about this throughout my research, because what we did here at the organization is sat down and went through what we wanted RTB to look like in 2020, and what would it take to be the most sought after organization in the science-based arena, and what would it take to get a successful person in? How could we provide that space for removing that person into a successful position and not leaving them with extreme debt or issues or crisis, those kinds of things. And so these are the three items that the organization came up with. There's a small group of leaders there. And so we were looking to first win the endorsement of 10 influential scientific and or Christian leaders well known and respected in their communities, to show that Reasons to Believe is not alone in what we are doing, but that we are really trying to influence influencers. And also, we would like to grow the RTB community of scholar evangelists from a few dozen to 100 or more, including visiting scholars, associate scholars, and RTB staff scholars. And so we're really looking to grow that scholar community to have more impact. And then the last one is to establish 1,000 partnerships with churches and evangelical ministries. We want people to know that we are there as a resource, so that when they have these issues or questions about science and faith, that there is a presence among the churches and not just an outside organization that deals with these matters. So that is very critical to getting these things achieved, is also critical to succession planning. So real quickly, I just wanted to highlight also, as I was going through this research, looking at a biblical framework and how appreciative inquiry has been into that, And as I was looking through specifically the Old Testament, I was looking at Joshua's succession to Moses, and I think that was a big transition. And I think as I went through this, there was messages along the way that God was continually saying, be strong and courageous. And I think as an individual, many times we think of courage as something that comes from within us. And what it meant here in the Bible, where God is telling them to be strong and courageous, is that courage was a confidence, remembering God's past work as they navigated the future in obedience. So it had nothing to do really with what was inside of us or who we were, but it was about who God was. And I think that was just very exciting for me to see, because I connected that with appreciative inquiry. How can we take that core of God's past work and use that to help move us ahead? And so it's identifying God's work within the past of an organization or present, and using that to move to the future. So I think the positive core of a successor, which really influences the positive core of an organization and how it's developed, should be modeled and consistent with the organization and founder. We're not looking again to replicate the founder, but we're looking for those things that are so unique to this ministry that they're absolutely things that are a must-have for that next leader. So the next part of this was setting up the methodology and design. And for me, I knew that we'll talk about appreciative inquiry was the methodology, but I wanted to use it through the lens of this Bella's 8 steps of how to create a process to really use appreciative inquiry. And I really appreciated her way of steps is to really looking at the people first. And I think my role here at the organization, both as writing this and within it, is really caring about the people we're working with, not just the people that we're serving, but the people that are utilizing their gifts within the organization. And so who I wanted to talk to and address, and we'll go through that in a little bit, and then the steps of and then why, and so that. And I think most of the time what I've taken away from this is that we always want to start with number 6, the what. We want to get our message across. We want to share without thinking about who and why, and really the purpose is what is the change we're looking to make. And so this is just more of the steps I went through to process that appreciative inquiry. So the methodology used in this research was appreciative inquiry, and just as a review here quickly, to appreciate something is the value of active recognizing the best in people or the world around us. It is affirming past and present strengths, successes, and potential. It's to perceive those things that give life to increase value. And then inquiry is the act of exploration and discovery, to ask questions, to be open to seeing new potentials and possibilities, and systematically exploring and studying. And so to me, I thought that this is a great way to address fear that many have in the change process. And so it steps back from the problem solving. It is kind of anti-problem solving. Instead of just looking at the issues within the organization, it's looking at the what could be. So what we call that then is the positive core, and other words for this or names for this are core values. And some of those elements are within an organization are the achievements, strategic opportunities, product strengths, technical assets, breakthrough innovations, elevated thoughts, best business practices, wisdom, and core competencies. And so these are all the things that we're taking a look at that makes reasons to believe unique. Every organization is unique, but we need to communicate what those uniquenesses are so that people understand who we are and who we aren't. And the organization has come up with a set of core values on how we interact outside of the ministry, but the organization is also working on internally, how do we define ourselves? What do we call our culture? And so these things, I think, can all be found through appreciative inquiry, and is a great practice to do. So what did we do? I first started with setting up a resource survey that began in our organizational assessment course, and just getting feedback from our resource users. What do they appreciate about us? Who do they like? And this was just the beginning of just getting some initial feedback to understand how we can begin asking questions, or how I can utilize this for other groups. Because we have so many resource users, it's a very large group to survey individually. So we just sent surveys out. And then next, what I did was I did an appreciative inquiry intervention with the optimization team, which was a leadership team here at Reasons to Believe. I also did a session with major donors at a major donor retreat, and then finally with the entire staff as a whole. And so let's see. So for the optimization team, there was a group of 6 who were a part of that, and each of them partnered up, as I had a list of a few questions for them to interact with as partners, and then report back to the group the findings. With the major donors, we had a whole retreat for our major donors, a whole weekend, where we were able to talk about succession planning, talk about the future, to talk about what has been done, and just to thank our donors. And during that time, I was able to do, there was a group of about 57 major donors there, and I also had them partner up and ask them appreciative questions about who they are individually, as well as reflecting on reasons to believe the organization and where Reasons to Believe thrives and flourishes. And so getting feedback from them. And then also, after all of that, the whole organization was invited to also give feedback individually. And I had them get into groups and then report back to the larger group as well. This is just a brief overview of timeline of just what I went through of the survey and the AI intervention. And so one of the things that was ended up being a lot of fun working through the resource survey is that in the past, Reasons to Believe hadn't done a lot of surveys. A lot of our information came from firsthand interactions with donors, with resource users, those kinds of things, but we hadn't done a lot of gathering information that we could really utilize. And so now Reasons to Believe is doing a much better job and doing a lot more of that. But at this time, we did a SurveyMonkey survey, and there was a big process, as I have not written a lot of surveys myself, and so I got a lot of feedback from our consultants, as well as I had the major donors give me feedback on it. An expert in writing surveys, Andrea Lynn Phillips, helped me with that. And then also, after all of that was done, I brought it back, and the marketing and advancement and editorial teams also gave some great feedback, and really kind of made it their own, and then it was finally disseminated. And so in the future, I know surveys will go much more quickly, but I think there was a lot of personal learning there as well for the organization to kind of go through that process. So for the appreciative inquiry interventions, these were all in 2016 in the fall. The first one was the major donors at the retreat, and the optimization team. We had 2 sessions, and then with the staff. And each of them provided me with feedback as to how to better communicate the AI intervention with the next group. So some of the outcomes that were provided, one of the things that I talked about earlier was finding a common language for what we do internally and externally. And I think one of the issues that I found as I worked within the organization is that our language meant different things to different people. With our different backgrounds, it can cause confusion. I'm talking about things from an organizational perspective. We have scientists here, we have accountants here, and our words mean different things to different people. And so I wanted to create a common language so that we can be very specific and define what we do and how we do it. And so some of the categories, after we did all the appreciative inquiry, I had them write down their responses to that. And as I looked at those, blindly, they were anonymous. And I also had Craig also help me kind of evaluate what categories, what were the similarities of things and how people answered, and letting their answers really become their own. I didn't set out or create categories, but I found that these were the 3 categories that kind of emerged from what RTB does well individually, the individuals within the organization, and also as a group. And so the 3 things were resources, just in how we produce and create online resources, books, videos, and groups of people where people can engage. The second one was events where people can connect in person. And then also approach as to how we carry out ministry internally and externally. An approach can fit within, those other 2, but I kept it separate because I found that was very important to all the different groups that we did the appreciative inquiry with. And so, so those are the things I think if Reasons to Believe can really focus around those 3 categories and really limit in a way their ministry to focus on those things and to really define what they are, that would be a huge help for them in the future. Some of the other outcomes were involvement and ownership from individuals within and outside the organization to make goals and succession succeed. So another reason for the appreciative inquiry was being able to learn from the staff, learn from the donors, and learn from leadership. It wasn't trying to teach or to train. It is more just providing them with things to think about. So I asked these questions in light of the 2020 vision. And so what I wanted to do was to learn from the staff, learn from the donors, and learn from the leadership. And so just in the process of asking these questions, what I found, even as the sessions went on, was the responsibility to take on that ownership, to be able to help carry those things out. I think that the difference is when leadership comes to the staff and says, this is what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, there isn't a lot of responsibility within that. But through an appreciative inquiry process, individuals can really begin to think through how they can not only be valued, but bring value to that process. And so I think it's a very servant leadership way to really come at things and how they can move the organization along. One of the things that I also just wanted to mention, because to me, one of my strengths from the Strengths Finders is positivity, and so I thrive on finding the good in individuals and organizations and what is out there. But one thing that appreciative inquiry does not address is the issue of power within organizations. And as I was reading that in the research, I thought about that, but as I carried out the appreciative inquiry with each of these groups, I realized that it was difficult to get people focused on the good. I think we are so set on what is wrong or problem solving, which does need to be addressed. We can't ignore the issues, especially this day and age. There's a lot of issues or a lot of harm that's been done to individuals or within organizations, and so I'm not saying to not do that, but for this specific project, to be able to get people in a place where we can focus on what could be, whether that's the individual or the organization, was a little bit of a challenge. And I think probably the hardest, where I heard that most was not with the major donors. The major donors, it was very interesting because I think they quickly jumped into the what could be and exciting things that Reasons to Believe could be, because they probably don't see the day-to-day of what goes on in organizations or the unique struggles that we have. But I did see that within the staff a little bit, kind of going from let's problem solve this to bringing them back to to let's just dream here for a while. And I also heard that within the focus groups too, of wanting to address issues. And so I think I think that's something for the future that every organization needs to know and address, is be able to allow people to get to talk about those things, but also move them into a place where we can think about positivity for a while. Let's see. So one of the, let's see here. So just a real quick recap. So if you wanted to see or know the different categories of the resources, events, approach for the major donors, most of, I think we had 33 answers that fell into the resource category. We had 14 that fell into the events category, and 31 that fell into the, let's see, approach. I'm sorry, 34 that were in resources, 14 in events, and 31 that were in the approach. For the optimization team, there were 10 responses in the resources, 4 events, and 10 and then finally with the staff, there were 7 responses that were in events, 9 that were in resources, and 10 that were in approach. So they were fairly distributed between those 3 different areas. Excuse me. One of the, let's see. So some of the recommendations that after going through this appreciative inquiry process with these 3 different groups, one of the things that really stuck out to me in some of the literature that we read throughout this, the courses here, where Roger's work, where he's talking about cybernetics and very complex images of what organizations look like today based on the brain and how the brain functions and how it stores the whole in parts. And I think this is a dramatic shift in organizational leadership, is to be able to learn from the parts. I think we always think about top-down approach to leadership, and I think this appreciative inquiry model really reverses that, and it's very anti what we've learned about organizations. And so that is also exciting to me, because I think when you see the parts, coming up with ideas that the head has no clue about or doesn't know, is exciting, because I think that is really efficiently using your organization and allowing them to truly be who God has created them to be as well. I think it also, especially for other nonprofits that really deal with vulnerable people, I think this helps vulnerable groups to really model how individuals can create the future and give them a voice. I think within any organization, there's many who start there who feel like they don't have a voice, and this process really allows the individuals to have a voice. Some further recommendations for reasons to believe is looking at C-level candidates who embody the core values of the organization, but at the same time allow them to use their unique giftings to help create the new vision. So one of the things that was unexpected for me as I looked through the responses from the staff answers was, or as people shared their experience where they thought they brought something to the organization. Some people would talk about, tasks that were accomplished or books that were created or something that was accomplished, but the language that people used to talk about what RTB could be, it was different. And I think that appreciative inquiry could be utilized to also identify people within the organization who could help create the new vision. And that was one of the things I learned from also our the consultants that we worked with. A lot of times it's the people at the top who are expected to have that vision, which they should be visionaries. But I think there is also a place to allow anybody in the organization to contribute their vision. that they see, and it needs to be the organizational vision. But I thought that was a unique finding to really see how appreciative inquiry could ask those questions so that people could communicate in a way that could identify them as a vision maker for the organization. I think Reasons to Believe should also spend further time developing the vision and language to carry it out. And I think one of the things I did as I was reviewing the responses to the appreciative inquiry as well was looking at Cameron and Quinn's their framework models of an organization, because I think those provide a lot of language, and they consist of I think 80% of the organizations that they've studied fit into one of the 4 frameworks that they talk about in there. And I've projected where I think Reasons to Believe fits within that, but I think it would be great for the organization to actually have the individuals take that survey and see if what I've projected is true. I also think it would be ideal to spend further time listening and learning from resource users, the people who are actually using our materials. And I think part of that really, I think that is really what is also going to help the funding of the organization. If we are meeting the social needs, the funding will come in, as Sloan and Kramer said. It's really meeting the social needs. If we are doing that, funding will be there. I think, and last, Leon here, is keep learning and doing. I think if the organization can continue to start the appreciative inquiry cycle over with different areas of the organization, to me, this was the most prominent and the most pertinent one to deal with right now is looking at succession planning. But there's so many areas within that could be addressed. And I think if the organization continues to be learners, that will benefit it greatly. And I think making clear the positive core, so that if others don't fit in it, it doesn't mean they aren't competent people, it doesn't mean that they aren't good at what they do, but it'll be clear to both, so that the organization really has what Colin says in Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus, because not having the right people there can also slow the vision down. And I think it's really important to make sure that it's very clear to the individuals what their core values are, and they need to align. And then the last part is really investing a portion of the budget for resources towards organizational development to work alongside the board for succession planning. So the board is really in charge of, succession planning in the sense of making sure that how that process is handled. But I think the whole organization needs to be a part of that. And I think that's what having that community, as well as the donors, communicating with them and having their feedback about what they're feeling about, will all result in a positive way to move forward together. And so those were the highlights of my research. There's a lot of detail and things that go into that, and so I'm happy to address that. And I just wanted to thank you for listening.
Where's Bill?
Okay, I'm with you. Yeah, I had lost my microphone icon there for a moment. So thank you, Hannah. Yeah, very helpful. It's good to kind of hear all that put together into a common presentation. Let's spend a little time now as we think about this project, Reason to Believe, that Hannah has facilitated. Let's try to see what's actually happened there, what maybe needs to happen in the future, what questions, thoughts, directions, clarification. Those of you who worked with Hannah very closely on this project, I'd appreciate you kind of starting out the conversations, since you would probably have some good thoughts for discussion topics. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment and see what you have.
Yeah.
Well, I think in general, by the way, my name is Phil Chin. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Reasons to Believe.
And I think in general, her assessments have been very accurate. We are in the process of doing a number of those things, so it's sort of a difficult way to judge, because it's kind of like we're in mid-step at this point. So to measure some of those efforts are a little difficult at this particular moment. But a lot of the concerns and a lot of the areas that she was talking about that are pain points for us are very real. They're very accurate to what we're going through right now. And we're going through the hard process of working through what that strategic planning is, what C-level candidates are part of that equation, and how do we successfully transition our founder or two founders in a very smooth way, so that the public will not lose confidence in who we are, as we consider ourselves a leading light in the apologetics field, in terms of evangelizing to a people group that not a lot of people really consider. In general, I just thought it was pretty accurate to what we're experiencing right now.
Okay.
This is Craig. One of the things that's happened as a step along that way is that we now have an interim COO, or executive level person, who is working with us not only as the directors of the organization, but is also working with our board and is working with the executive team. So there's some redefining of responsibilities and roles that's going on. You can't bring in a person like that and not have that happen if they're going to be effective. So we're working through that process, and I think educating that person a lot, as he is new to our organization. There's a lot that's going on about that.
I think there's also, in addition to that, just a psychology that's a part of this transition. I think it's difficult for any founder to be a part of this transition and sort of walk that thin razor's edge of planning for the future and planning for a future that is sort of without them. And so there's just this psychology that occurs throughout, not just for the founder, but also for the people who have been here for quite some time. And RTB has fostered a culture where people stay. I mean, Hannah spoke about 15 years. Craig's been with Reasons to Believe for about 20 years. I've been with Reasons to Believe for about 17. There are probably about 50% of the people who have been here for more than a decade, maybe even longer than, or more percentage of that. So these are all kind of parts to this transition, and I think going through the appreciative inquiry helps to unlock a little bit of the fear and dread and move it into a place of anticipating, of excitement and anticipation of what could be. Because when you've been working kind of in a job for over a decade, sometimes it gets kind of old hat. But with the appreciative inquiry, it allows people to kind of dream again, to foster that curiosity of, what could be? How could I help out the organization that I love coming in to work for in maybe new and different ways that are part of my own passions or part of my own giftings that God has given us.
And I think just to follow up with that, Phil, is also from a supervisor side, is sometimes we maybe pigeonhole or put people into a box where we think, this is what they do, this is what Craig does, this is what he's good at. And the appreciative inquiry process may find new ways or talents that even though we've been here for over a decade, we haven't utilized. And so I think it's uncovering some of those gems that maybe haven't had the opportunity to play themselves out. And so, and I think that is a great way to steward an organization's resources.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question. Is there right now any kind of position description, or you might call it a job description? Is there any kind of position description laid out for the new person that might come in to head the organization? Or and focus. Ray Rood has worked with youth, and that he's such a visionary that vision is so needed in a world that doesn't focus on tradition but focuses on vision. And we live in the world where science and faith is probably a different animal now. So that's my question.
That's a good question. There is a written description of what they're looking for, and that has been changed numerous times, I think, from the original draft. And I think as of the fall, I resigned from Reasons to Believe to focus on this dissertation and finish this. And during and even prior to my leaving, I spent a lot of time talking with Kathy about this, about just, that whole idea of, the external candidate versus the internal candidate. And there's been different thoughts over time as to who that would be, what that would look like. And I think right now, the ideal, which I had also recommended too, is really looking at how to do both, and because they have 2 people leaving, it's going to take multiple people at this point in the organization to do all the things that Hugh and Kathy have done. And they are also very unique individuals who can do just a ridiculous amount of work. And so I think they have some superpowers. But they do have a description of what they're looking for in a CEO. But I know they're also looking internally to really help, to really find leadership within the organization, to really move into positions of what Kathy has been doing as well. And so I think it's both, and looking externally and internally to see what the future could look like. And like you said, Grace, I think, science and faith, that topic is going to continue changing, and there's new issues that are going to be brought up. And I think it's good to have internal leadership, but I think it's also good to really maybe bring some new ideas from the outside as well, because I think right now Reasons to Believe has some gaps in the organization for their size on things that could be met externally, if that makes sense.
I think this is Grace again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if I have ever given you the 5 T's of transition. And that's teach, train, turnover, transition, and trust. And the hardest part is the trust, because it's going to change. It needs to change. Otherwise, it will sink. And do you think there's anybody now in the organization that you think has that type of perspective that could, work into that process?
Yeah, I definitely, 2 of the gentlemen sitting right here, Phil and Craig, who I've worked with for a long time, have definitely already done a lot of that, I think, on their own in developing teams and groups here that they are continuing to teach and train. And I think the great part about having people like them here is that they can talk about the history of the organization. I think that's really important for whoever comes into the organization to really understand that history, because I think that is so important to the organization, the individuals here, as well as understanding, I mean, where you've been so that you know where you're going. But I also think it's very important to, you know, if there isn't anybody internally, I think really our leadership as far as the executive team is really primarily a lot of scientists, and they are phenomenal at what they do. They are brilliant, brilliant people. But I think looking at it organizationally, that's a whole nother animal. And so I think being able to have a person come in and whether it's a consultant or an individual to kind of help put connect that business plan with the funding and the vision is really some of the key parts. And so one of the things that I've already talked with Kathy about a lot of this, but some of the future conversations that I would like to have with her too is to provide some of this information in a different way for Reasons to Believe, so that they can really identify what those gaps are, so they can, you know, bring somebody in, whether it's.
And it may be that there needs to be a person that's just responsible for moving the transition period. I understood from you before, I think that they were going to stay on the board.
Yes, at least Hugh will probably stay on the board. Actually, Kathy may as well. And they do have plans to still be involved in the ministry, but in very different capacities. One of the things we've talked about with the board is what Hugh is extremely gifted at is writing and speaking. And I think he will do that until he has no breath left in him.
Yeah.
And he will probably outlive half of us here at the organization too, even though he's getting close to his mid-70s. And it's just who he is. And I think he has no ego that I think other organizations, no matter who you are, it's hard to not let go of him. But I think for Hugh, if he can focus on what he loves, that would only be an asset to the organization. And I know from working in with that, I think that is an ideal fit to still have Hugh and Kathy in their compelling ways to connect with donors, to do speaking and writing, to focus on those things. What they do not want to do is to make business decisions anymore. And I think that's what they're really looking to move to somebody else who has maybe more experience with that. And so what they've done is they are phenomenal at starting an organization and moving it to 30 years. I think right now what we need to do is look to somebody who is great at taking that second phase and moving that along. And I think those are very different people, but that's why I think the fear comes in is if that person doesn't have the same positive core as you and Kathy. And so I think really identifying that, making that clear will really allow the organization to really find whoever it is to come in and help them out.
In Genesis, they're going through something like this, and they're calling Priscilla now a storyteller.
Oh, yes.
And so that I would think Hugh and Kathy would be ones who could storytell and write and speak and keep on being open themselves to the future.
Mm-hmm. I've talked with Ray Root of the Genesis group and Priscilla a little bit as well to explain what's going on with Reasons to Believe, because I know Priscilla is a new head of the Genesis group consulting organization, and that Grace is a part of. And Ray Root was the founder, and he is still involved with the organization, but in a very different capacity. But I saw a lot of similarities to the Genesis group that I see with Reasons to Believe, and so I think they would be a great resource to the organization as well.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, Hannah. Good. This is Bill. as you look at it, first of all, tell me, is there kind of a projected time frame in terms of the transition? I mean, it sounds like there's an interim CEO at this point. Is that what I heard correctly?
Yes, right now there's an interim CEO who Craig was mentioning, and it's a great kind of situation right now. There's an organization who has people with great expertise who are retired or semi-retired who come in and help organizations in transition, and it's been on since I believe April 1st. And so he's trying to learn a little bit about the organization. But long term, I think that position, as well as a new CEO, needs to be impacted. Ideally, the whole 2020 vision, it's not stated in there, but reaching those goals, the team believed that if we could meet those, that RTV would be in a prominent place to really, attract whoever would be coming in next. And so ideally, it may have shifted, but 2020 was around the time that they wanted to make that transition.
Okay.
If they have to make it sooner, I just talked to Kathy, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and I know she's already working on kind of transitioning her time to moving a lot of the things that she oversees to the COO. But I know it'll take a process. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. So I know they're already moving in that direction, but their goal was to kind of achieve those new positions by 2020.
Okay, good. You went through organizational assessment class, and because one of the models we talk about that we use here at BGU, of course, is the Joy at Work model.
Yeah.
And we see that as a distributive management is the kind of the technical term that we use for that, for that kind of a management model. And just as you understand that model, and the fact that you talked a little bit about it when you talked about the parts. Looking to the different parts of an organization, that there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of resource there. But as you look at Reason to Believe, how would you characterize the organization in terms of the Joy at Work model, where there's really a distributive management model where certain people are given responsibility, authority, but and the buck actually does stop with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that. I love the book Joy at Work, and I think it really, resonates here at Reasons to Believe, because that's one of the messages that the organization is also trying to communicate to our resource users, is that I think sometimes people see nonprofits and specifically Christian organizations and churches as kind of this higher spiritual, level of work. And I think one of the things that we try to communicate to specifically scientists who we interact with or anybody is that when you are doing your science, you are discovering more about God and who God is and how he's trying to communicate to us through the world around us. And I think that to us is an important message of you need to be there in that field so that you have influence on that areas. And so I think just that the idea is something that the organization is trying to also communicate to our audience. I think as far as the parts to the whole, I think RTV has developed some things and we've ended some and started some others, but I think these groups have been able to really come up with some great ideas. I give one example would be, I've seen over this last year, Phil Chen's group, he's the marketing director, he oversees the website as well as media, and he's got a great group of people who he's been able to really delegate some specific tasks and jobs, but within that they've been able to really dream and come up with some unique ideas that RTV has never done. And I think it's been really fun to kind of see the energy and excitement come out of those teams, because in the past I think most people here relied on the scholars for everything. So whether it be marketing or how to ship something, it seemed that the scholars had, we'll ask the scholars, they're the ones. And so I think what we've been able to see is a shift in and people really being able to not just come up with ideas, but being able to then act on them and play them out. And so I think there's less and less, I would say, control, maybe by the executive team, as well as the scholars here who are also seen as a key component of the leadership. So I think there definitely has been empowerment, and I've seen a lot of it begin, but I think it's something that could really could build some great momentum here to be seen throughout the entire organization.
Okay, good. Let me ask you another question. We've got to fill out an evaluation form, so I'm going to get a few of these questions out on the table. How do you, as you look at your, having come to this project, has this project actually affected you personally? And even just your work at BGU, and I think that it's culminated in this project. But what's happened in your own life based on going through this project and just kind of going through, the BGU perspective on things?
Yeah, that is a huge question. I think most students who go through this program, I think it is definitely life-changing in how we think and how we feel, and some of the outcomes I would not have projected personally by any means. But I think just to begin with, going through this process and studying the organizational models and frameworks and has really helped me to realize I love this. I love engaging with organizations in this way. And I think especially being a part of BGU, I not only want to do it to help Reasons to Believe, which I love the people and I love the places, but I want to see how I can help other organizations too. I think Reasons to Believe is, I feel like it's got the evangelism side. That's who we are and what we do. And I would love to also help other nonprofits who maybe are helping people who are more vulnerable. And so being able to use some of the things that I've learned here at BGU, whether it's in consulting or volunteering, even as something as simple as my daughter's preschool. It's a small little parent co-op who's doing great things with little people. And I would love to, I've been volunteering there a lot, and I think being able to really help them, do some things that I've learned, that they don't have there at that school. I think as far as Reasons to Believe, through this process, I really felt, God moving me to a different place. And I get emotional about this, sorry. But I think for me, it's really it was a very hard decision, but to leave the organization. And so part of that was through this process, I realized that I also needed to do this, that I needed to go through this succession planning, and it was very hard, but it was very good. And I've had all these people here to kind of help me through that and care about me. And so I think making that decision to also know that it was also my turn to leave was very, very difficult, but also very, very good. And so to actually live out what I was writing about was it's a lot easier said than done. So I can only imagine the process that Hugh and Kathy and other people who are CEOs who have put their heart and soul into a place are going through. So I'm really happy, but it's also something that is very, very bittersweet to me.
I'd like to encourage you, Hannah, this is what some student did years ago, and I thought it was a great idea, is to put together a personal board of directors. Mm-hmm. And that would be people that you would meet with continually, mm-hmm. but it focuses on the personal. And you've gone through a lot of personal stuff this last couple of years. And but the personal board of directors actually is helping you to be the project director of your own life, and a support system that so you're not just out there as a lone wolf trying to figure out what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. You're all on it here.
Okay, anybody else who would like to jump in? Not asked a question yet.
I'll throw one for the team. One of my, as you guys were all talking, I was kind of wondering, and this is both for RTB staff and for Hannah, in terms of the succession and going through this process, I wondered, and I think Grace also touched on this, is how has it maybe changed the language that you use as you think about, instead of Hugh and Kathy leaving, that it's more of, and it could look and be perceived as, you know, like a loss. How could it be changed in such a way that, you know, we're transforming some kind of language, that it's more of a growth? That maybe changing a paradigm might also help transition the agency, you know, into being more palatable to change, as opposed to like an aversion because it's being associated with loss.
I think one of the things I mentioned in my paper is also just what is, and not necessarily calling it a loss, but looking at it as a gain, because the organization still has Hugh and Kathy, and they still want to be a part, just in very different capacities. And so I think there is still, you know, we can still use their expertise and their personalities and that sort of thing. But I think it's also telling the stories. I think like Grace just mentioned storytelling, and Kathy and Hugh are great storytellers. And that's one of the books, upcoming books that Hugh wants to write, is a lot of these stories of interactions he's had over the years. And I think those are the things that people hang on to, that people can retell. And I think being able to acknowledge what has been, and so through those stories, I think you can find the positive core. We don't have to lament of, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore, but what was it about that scenario that RTB will take with us? And so it's going to look different as the organization grows and becomes larger. We don't have the same, you know, it's not 10 people here anymore, it's 40 people here, it's going to be 60 people here, it's how many. So you can't do business as usual, but I think, you know, being able to tell those stories allows a component of finding, oh, we still have that positive core. We don't do that anymore, but the positive core is still there. And I think, and I don't think it is wrong to lament. Gwen and I know, went to a conference where there was a session on lament, and I think Elizabeth Hall talked about how it is a spiritual discipline. And so I don't think we should shy away from that either, about, you know, in a sense, mournings, you know, the change, but also being able to move on. And so we want to allow people to have those experiences and feelings, but also, you know, Hugh and Kathy will also frame it in a way that it is positive. And so I think there is a lot of language of that is being developed and has been developed that will continue on.
I've just finished writing my memoir, and I would think that Hugh and Kathy could write a memoir of their whole history, so that is an asset to the future of the organization, and people can learn from that about the history. And a memoir is different than just a diary. Right. A memoir is really what encourages you to get into the stories and the emotional side of things. as well as writing actually what they remember right from the beginning and what their feelings were and everything like that would be wonderful, I think.
Definitely. One idea, I don't know if it's an action yet, but they talked about Hugh in our staff meetings. One of the things that our scholars do is report, their events, what's been happening and experiences, and they'll usually tell a story or two. And Hugh always ends up with a story about somebody he met on a plane and the conversation they had. And it's ironic because Hugh is an introvert. He's not an extrovert. He doesn't start up conversations, but people are so drawn to him and curious about him because he is just an interesting person. And what inevitably happens is God puts somebody next to him on a plane, and they end up in a conversation, and it is, it could be, a world-renowned physicist from Germany, and they end up, who's an atheist, and he, this story about, there was a gentleman flying to, I believe, go meet with Microsoft, and they ended up talking and on a plane, and the gentleman started asking all these questions, and it was all these questions that Hugh had just answered in his latest book, and the gentleman said, how do you know, why do you have answers to all of these? And he said, well, I just wrote about it, because these are the questions that so there's just the unique, I feel that God has made Hugh to be such a unique individual that he has these incredible stories. And I think everybody has incredible stories. And so they've talked about putting together a book called Plain Stories. And I think for Hugh, he doesn't want it to be, oh, that's such a great story. They are great stories. But I think what he really pushes the staff to do also is to have our own stories, is being open to the people who are around us and our influence, so that when God brings people along our path, that we will have a story to share with them too. And so I think that's a great model for the organization is, it's just praying and being open to the people who come across our way.
I think my only question would be, what would you tell the Hannah of 3 years ago about where the Hannah of 2018 is right now?
Oh, finish your dissertation 2 years ago. That is a tough question, Liz. Oh, goodness. I think for me, one of the reasons I wrote about change in the beginning was because one, for some reason, I love change. And I think it is because of the dramatic changes that have happened in my life. I've always seen good come out of them. And so I don't fear change. I get excited about it, even if it's scary, it's weird. And I wanted to find a way to bring people along with me. And I think when crazy things happen, people are like, oh, you don't get worried about that. And I think it's because I know and I have confidence that God is in it and God is with me in how I respond to those. And so back when I started talking with Kathy about writing the dissertation, and I said, Kathy, here are my ideas on what I think is most important. And she said, you need to write about how you do what you do. And she said, that'll make a great dissertation. And so to me, appreciative inquiry is the closest thing that I do to really, in my role as, a director in whatever position I'm in. And so, like I said, it's much easier to also write about than to do. And so I think knowing what I did then, I thought I would end up in a very, very different place. And so right now, being, finishing the dissertation, in a sense, being a stay-at-home mom and having a surprise third child is not where I thought I would be right now. And so I think I would just tell myself to go back to what I'm writing and reading about and to really just be in it and thrive in it. I think good things will come. So that's what I am confident that God is in this space right now of where I'm at, and that I can continue to learn from the situations. Like I said, whether I'm volunteering, whether I'm, being a mother, I want to get back into a space of where I can be involved with an organization. But I think where I'm at right now is I'm getting to experience what I've learned in writing about. So I think I would just encourage myself to continue to just be in that space.
Could I ask Micah to give his perspective on all this, since the book is, well, I'm calling it a book, is dedicated to you, and you've been a part of all of it. So in a few words, can you share with us?
In a few words? It's been a long journey. I mean, you started 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And at that time, we did not have any children. And so I think our vision and our plan has had to undergo a number of revisions. It's tested our fortitude as a couple, but I have, since she first expressed interest in this when I was finishing up a graduate degree, I mean, I've always known that Hannah was capable of doing something great. And I've always wanted to see her have every means of being able to pursue those ends. And so 3 children has definitely forced us to reevaluate priorities and time commitments, and yeah, I've seen her be committed to this through the end, and see her discover passions and be open to every new opportunity and relationship that comes across her path. And sometimes it's been difficult for me to let it be her thing, because I am so intertwined into it all. And knowing, you know, her studies it's not just something that she's doing for herself, but it impacts me, it impacts the life that we live, it impacts her time commitments, and that impacts our children. So it's been an emotional journey. It's incredibly gratifying to be able to be present and hear her process through this before you all, because this has been her life and her world for 3 years. I mean, the 3 years that she's been working on the dissertation, from the project proposal and 2 years writing it. And I'm incredibly excited for it to be over, but not for the sake of it being over, because what it means to me is an opportunity for her to fully implement what she's learned these last 8 years into now a life of practice, and being able to go forth from here and do what she says that she loves, and being able to continue to support her in those dreams and those passions. So yeah, I don't know that. I'm grateful for you all that you've been I mean, everybody here has been such a critical part of that journey, whether it was in the workplace and helping her to, you know, process as it relates to the work that's going on at Reasons to Believe, or whether that's been the support team helping her to, you know, stay focused on it when she's exhausted and when, you know, when the due date of a baby is uncertain and, you know, even this date had to be rescheduled 3 times. And yeah, it feels like, kind of like what you were saying, the personal board of directors. And I feel like Hannah has reached this point because of the community that is behind her, and it feels like a community project in one sense. So I'm amazed at what she's been able to accomplish these last few years, and I don't know that I could have done it all. And so yeah, I'm sorry. Do you want to say something, Grace?
Max, thank you. I think you've been observed and heard. You've been an amazing, amazing person in all of this support. And so, and it definitely, marriage, you know, affects the couple. And so I think you're going to have a lot of joy in the future, both of you. And I want to bless you too in your future.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we move into an evaluation time?
I'll ask a question.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Hannah for sharing today. Yeah, it's, you know, it's one thing reading, you know, words on a page, and another just having this, well, first of all, your presentation, which was just, you know, very clear, compelling, really well communicated, but also just hearing actually all these comments about Reasons to Believe and kind of the personal side. It's like it gives the whole dissertation just a much more sort of personal, texturized, richer, you know, perspective than just words on a page. However, as I think Hannah probably knows by now, my questions are more of a technical nature. So if you'll like bear with me, there's one thing that I think's been implicit today, but I'd love to hear you just kind of connect the dots, and maybe I'm just a slow learner. But so the whole purpose of this project, like I think it's page 1, and even your title says that, you know, you want to identify and experience a transformational model for succession, right? For the succession of the CEO and executive vice president. And so I'm wondering, I'd love to hear you say, like, specifically, how is the model, right, the appreciative inquiry model, how do you see that as being a model for success?
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. Yeah, excited to explain that very well here. I think it's a great model because so I'm tying a handful of things together: the succession plan, which takes resources, and innovation, which I mentioned, you know, in the beginning too, which also takes resources. And so one of the things that I know many nonprofits do not want to do is to spend a lot of resources on organizational development. However, when you look at the for-profit, they are spending tons of money in this area. And so instead of spending tons of money in this area, one of the things that I was trying to do is to try to find a way that was more cost effective in stewarding the organization's resources. And so So it's a process. The reason I look at it as a model for succession planning is because it's a process that's getting the whole organization involved with succession planning. And so as I went through the AI process with these different groups, it was in light of the 2020 vision and looking at what the future of RTB would be or could be, and that's with and without, Steve and Kathy. And so the reason I'm looking at AI is because there's a lot of great succession models out there that are really going through, here's a step-by-step way to do succession planning. And so I think those should be used, and those are great. What I wanted to do is to identify a process and a means so that the organization as a whole could go through this process together. How do we talk about this process? And so just by being able to ask questions instead of telling people, oh, this is probably what's going to happen, and then different departments or different individuals within an organization, there's, you start hearing these fears leak out, or what if this happens, or what if they hire so-and-so, and, there's just a lot of hearsay that isn't really helpful for a nonprofit in this kind of transition. And so being able to address the matter of succession planning on the head with the whole organization allows everybody to be engaged in that process, and it allows everybody to have input on that process. And so even though we did those AI processes as a small group and large groups, my hope and desire is really that the directors or team leaders from the organization would continue to process those things with those groups so that they can think, okay, for the Vision 2020, we need to get to those goals so that RTB can be in a good place for that transition. So what can we do as individuals and as a small group? We've got parts here, but maybe this group working with this group can create some things that are greater, that are going to be greater than what the leadership can come up with on their own. And so I didn't want this to be a closed off process where just the leadership or the exec team or the board, and that's where it has started at. And there's certain things that should be kept, in high level confidence and things like that. There's a place for everything. But I think when organizations and donors are left out of the loop entirely, that's where fear seeps in, that's where trust gets lost. And so this is a way, I think, that not only for Reasons to Believe, but I think for a lot of organizations to really use this model, while in transition, it allows people to be a part of the process in a positive way. And so does that make sense? Does that answer what you were getting at, Rhonda? Okay.
Yeah, and word I keep thinking of is the idea of cultivation. And in some ways it seems like what you're doing is really helping to cultivate the right sort of conditions, for transformation, for lasting, change. At the end of the day, you can't point to people and say, okay, you need to transform, right? But you can, right? There are some processes, like you said, that can help to cultivate the right kind of context where people can really be engaged in the process.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you. That's a good explanation.
Let me ask you one follow-up question to that, Hannah.
Yeah.
As you think about this project, what would you say is the major transformation, contribution, whatever you want to call it, that your project has made at RTB?
Mm-hmm.
Just what's the one, if you just had to pick one, what would be the major result of your project in the life of RTB?
Mm-hmm. I think I really love the posture of learning. I think Reasons to Believe as an organization, our ministry is about curiosity and addressing questions and things like that. But I think I wanted to find a way to bring that into the staff. How do we do that as an organization, not just in the science faith realm? So this is a way to provide, to really show curiosity is a core value. And I think that's one of the things that emerged from this and from the whole learning process was we want to be a curious organization, both in the science of faith realm, but as a ministry, we want a way to kind of, like Rhonda said, cultivate that curiosity. And so this is a way, through appreciative inquiry, just to be able to have a tool that directors or managers or whomever can ask questions and get them into a habit of being able to first ask and tell. And I think that's one of the things that Jane Vella talks about a lot is really, as leaders, we need to provide information so that there's a context or a framework to work within. But I think this transformation of for me personally and as an organization is being able to really ask questions and learn from everybody. And so that's what I hope continues at Reasons to Believe, is that we remain a curious organization that cares about the individual. And I think having that solidified before and potentially a new C-level leader comes into the organization, so that they are on the same page of being curious to know what others in the organization think.
Okay.
A dictator from the top down. And so I think that curious way of approaching people and caring about the individuals really models how we want this organization to act and how we want our ministry to be.
Okay. Okay, with that, I am going to close down the discussion. We do need to move into an evaluation session just because some time issues. What I'm going to be doing here is pulling some of you out of the session, and then I'll bring you back in about 15 minutes. So it'll basically be myself, Grace, and Rhonda. I guess we are we're kind of the voting members of this group. Okay, so I'm going to put the rest of you on hold. Let's see. Okay, I think I have everyone back in. I'm sorry it took us so long. You get people in academics together to talk, and they just go on and on and on. It's okay. I'm going to let Grace make the initial announcement, and then a couple others may jump in.
Well, Hannah, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
After much deliberation and support, we would like to give you a strong pass, which means that you have good competence, your satisfactory implementation, comprehension, writing skills, and oral review. And then there are a few minor revisions that especially Rhonda and Bill suggested. So those will come to you before you actually, get your book bound.
All right.
So let's everybody say yay or something. And now, now Dr. Hannah Palpant. Let me close with a word of prayer.
Well, let us say a few more things, Grace.
Oh, you want to say something? Okay.
Close this too quickly.
Okay.
Hannah, I just want to say too, congratulations. You've just done some amazing work there with RTB, and I think you're really helping this organization see some things. If anything, you're kind of taking this organization through, what we call an organizational assessment, basically, right? You're kind of taking them through, and I really like the idea of trying to clarify their core values. That is just excellent. As you've said, there just needs to be some more thinking towards, I'm going to call it capacity building for the organization. Just some of the things, and as you've introduced this organization to the whole appreciative inquiry process, that is just so good. And we at BGU are so endorsing that particular model. And of course, we endorse the Joy at Work model too. And I think you've been thoroughly indoctrinated with that whole process too. but yeah, I just think, there's a few other places, and because Rhonda has worked with you on a few issues, and she can work with you on a few others, just a few places that we just wanted to kind of strengthen some of the conciseness in a couple of places that we just think would make the dissertation stronger, because, this is a piece that's, you're going to use this dissertation, hopefully, with RTB, and there may be others that God would want to use your work. And so we just want to make sure that it's excellent. So that's our goal.
Thank you.
Rhonda, anything you want to add to all that?
Yeah, I guess I just echo the others. Yeah, it's been a privilege to be along this journey for a little while, and yeah, congratulations once again, really on a job well done. I mean, it's fun. It's fun actually to read something that, it's not just, again, it's not just words on a page. It's something that you've actually lived out and you've utilized, and that's actually been really fun for me, because my experience has largely been in the PhD realm. So it's fun to actually see this really taking life, So yeah, well done. And I see a little carriage in the background.
Yes,
Is that the baby?
it is.
Oh,
Oh,
could
wow.
I ask the people in the room to hold hands and include the baby and support Hannah? And I hope somewhere along the line you'll go all out and have a big party.
We will.
We will.
Got that scheduled.
So, Dr. Hannah Palpant, may I offer a prayer? And then let's all support her in the coming months. Dear Lord, we come to you tonight, or this evening, this afternoon, and we just want to offer this step in Hannah's life. It's been challenging, it's been exciting, but here she is at the end of this process, but the beginning of a new. And we thank you for the baby that's come along in the process. And so bless her, give her peace and love and joy, and in their family. And we wish many, many, many good things along the way. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, again, thank you all for joining us for this time with Hannah, and it's just been a joy to kind of get to know you all a little bit anyway. And just pray God's blessing and God's discernment and wisdom and everything that's going to be needed as you move forward to whatever the next steps are, Hannah, that the Lord has for you.
Yeah, keep us all in the loop.
I will.
Sure. All right. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got to close down the session, especially because of time. But again, thanks again for everyone who's been a part of this time. And you will get some stuff emailed to you, Hannah. And graduation is in a couple of weeks. So
We'll see.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
all right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.